Welcome to the first episode of Beyond the Tour. I'm Jake, and with me is Luke. How are you?
Hey, Jake. Happy to be here for our first episode. I've got the Rippers cap on, celebrating back-to-back wins for Team Ripper, and ready to talk all things golf with you.
Yeah, absolutely. They've done pretty well over the last couple of weeks, haven't they?
Yeah, it's great to see them return to form, particularly Leash, showing some good trajectory.
Yeah. Now, we caught up in person at LIV Adelaide after getting to know each other a little bit on X, and we both actually had the idea of potentially looking at a podcast, which is the conversation we ended up having, and this obviously is what led us to this particular show. Maybe we should give the listener a little bit of a background of what each of us has done in golf or why we're here at this point. I'm happy for you to start off.
Sounds good. I'm a father of four, love to unwind and de-stress from work and from family life by playing golf. So I started golf in my teenage years, was a member at the Brisbane Golf Club for 20 odd years and have been a member at a couple other clubs here in Queensland where I reside. Have loved golf all my life. And I think much to the sort of cries, or different to the decries and the moans that we hear on social media, I think right now is probably the most interesting time for professional golf. The change that we've seen LIV bring about in the professional golf world has been really dynamic. It's exciting to see the amount of money that's being invested into golf. And so it's a really exciting time to be part of the conversation, and hence the idea for maybe you and I to get together and start to talk about this in a pod.
Yep, absolutely. I myself got into golf. I moved from the town of, my background is in the travel industry. So straight out of school, I got into the travel industry, and I've owned a travel agency since 2009. It was in Melbourne itself, and we moved down onto the peninsula with a young family. So my son at the time was three, 4, and had a young daughter. So in 2015, we moved on to Moona Links. So our house was just above the driving range there. So that got me into golf. And the bug hit me pretty hard. So I'd usually get out, put the kids to bed and get out for a routing of 4 or 5 holes. So I'd go and hit some balls on the range. And I went down a rabbit hole hard. So getting all the lessons, playing golf 3 or 4 times a week, got myself quite low from a handicap perspective over 2 or 3 years, got down to very low single digits. And yeah, ever since then, I've been hardcore into golf. The biggest change I've seen, probably even in that short period, although it's now pushing up to 9 years, but I used to love switching on the European Tour of an evening, and you'd watch some really good quality golf play. And then you'd be able to switch across of a morning time, watch the PGA Tour. And I really noticed over the past sort of 5 years or COVID sort of years, the quality of tours globally has really been hit by the dominance of the PGA Tour. So very similar to you, the rise of LIV, although controversial, has been really good in terms of the viewer outside the US. I think it's a really exciting time at the moment. There's lots of good quality golf being played around the world, which I think is really important. And yeah, I think you get yourself outside of the bubble that is social media, and it seems to be quite healthy, the golf ecosystem.
Yeah, I don't think golf has been more popular. It's hard to get a tee time. Tee sheets are full at so many different clubs. Golf courses that didn't have waiting lists, now they've got years worth of waiting lists. And so I think a combination of COVID and also just the general excitement of professional golf at the moment is driving a really strong demand. But just back to your story, a couple of things that jumped out at me. Firstly, how quickly you got to low single figures, quite impressive. And secondly, on the Mornington Peninsula there, just sport for choice in terms of quality golf courses down there.
Oh, incredible. As I said, it was completely coincidental, but I've fallen into, in my opinion, what is the best golf in all of Australia in terms of a grouping of courses. There are better courses obviously up on the Sandbelt down in Tasmania, but in terms of accessible golf in a small sort of region, I think this is the best in Australia, and it probably rivals some of the best in the world really as well.
Have you got a favourite?
St Andrews Beach. I really love the layout of St Andrews Beach. It's a course that I play probably every 3 or 4 months. I'm not sure if it's a course that I would enjoy playing every week because it is quite difficult in places. In terms of layout, probably the dunes. That's, although it's not as conditioned as well as the national courses, St Andrews Beach, the layout there is very versatile. So I was a member there for 4 or 5 years, and depending on pin positions, wind direction, you're playing a very different course day to day. I think that's probably my favourite layout down here. I'm now a member of Portsea, which is quickly improving in terms of the conditioning. It's a great little club to be a member of. All right, Ricky, sorry, you go.
Course. Yeah, June's a wonderful golf course, particularly public access golf course. And yes, I can attest to the difficulty of St Andrews Beach. That Doak design beat me up badly last year, back in September on a boys' trip.
Yeah. It's a fun little course, isn't it?
Some struggling memories there. Yeah.
Now, format for this pod, Lucky, how are we going to tackle this?
Yeah, so I think we'll have a quick rundown of some of the key results on the PGA Tour, LIV Tour, etc. Talk about some of the things that stood out for each of us in the particular events of the week. And then also we like to call out other bits of news that grabbed our interest throughout the week. I think that's a good format for us to kick off with.
Absolutely. So we'll head straight across, I think, to the biggest event for the week, which was LIV Singapore. So we had the team competition, the Rippers winning that, which was their second week on the run. They bet the Fireballs and the Clique. And on the individual side of the competition, Brooks was a runaway winner, really. He looked in complete control and looks to be rounding into ominous form coming into PGA Championship.
Yeah, I tweeted earlier over the weekend that we're 2 weeks out from a major championship, and Brooks says, "Here, hold my beer," and he's on truly starting to peak at the right time. I was interested to read some of the comments that he'd made in press conferences around how he thinks he's got the ability mentally to go to places that other golfers can't get to, and that really struck a chord with me around how Tiger Woods was in those majors, where he was just really able to compartmentalize anything else that was going on around him and focus solely on the task at hand. Incredible win from Brooks. As you say, he never really looked threatened. And that golf course, Sentosa, it makes you hit the shots as you come down the stretch. Some of those tee shots are extremely demanding. He just never looked phased. He makes the putts he needs to make. And a great win from Brooks, edging out Cam and Leash, who had really good finishes, particularly Cam over the weekend. Great scores. Probably could have been different if he'd had a better score on Friday. But really great event to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think focusing on Cam for a second, he has come into the last couple of seasons looking like he's really enjoyed the off-season. And if we go back to his 2022 season, when he come into that season, he was looking as fit as I've ever seen him. And he really hasn't since then. But what was interesting this week when he was speaking at one particular point to Suan, he was talking about the fact that he's finding that he's working out everything in terms of his game, but he seems to be on a diet as well, which is good because the optimized Cam Smith is pretty hard to beat, and I'm glad that he's paying more attention to those aspects of his game.
That's right, and I think the team aspect has something to do with that as well. I know there's been lots of criticism of the team aspect of LIV and people saying, I just don't really care. But the change this year to make sure that the fourth score counts on Sunday, I think has given the players a lot more to play for. And also the criticism from the OWGR side of things that the team event is a blocker to them obtaining ranking points. I just see that there's an increased level of commitment to the team side of things, and I think that's filtering through into Cam's individual play as well, wanting to lead from the front.
What do you think of that fourth score counting? I've been thinking about that a little bit, and I wouldn't mind seeing all scores count on all days and maybe adding 1 or 2 players to each roster so that each week the teams maybe have to choose who their best squad is But having all four scores counting every week, I think fixes up some of those issues that the OWGR potentially has with it, because you can't benefit your teammate by perhaps not scoring as well as you possibly could because your score matters.
I was thinking the same thing. Having all four scores count really holds the feet to the fire of these players, ensuring that there's no free passes on any day. Hadn't really considered adding an extra player or two. That's an interesting idea. Might be difficult to make work in practice. I guess you're pulling professional golfers offline. They may or may not get a game. And what other opportunities are they foregoing to do that? But I guess a big signing bonus might solve a lot of those problems.
Yep. It's maybe expanding on what some of the reserves are doing, like Wade Ormsby. So obviously each LIV event, him and his caddy are paid to come along and he sits there in reserve. Now, if you've got an extra person on each roster, but maybe you don't need to do that in particular. If you get selected, then you get brought up to the LIV League. If you're not selected, you're playing your normal schedule, I think. And maybe you're starting to fill those positions with more developmental style players. So the younger players who are maybe already on the Asian Tour or playing on the Korn Ferry Tour potentially. I don't know. It's certainly an aspect that you can start considering, because injuries is one thing. Form is a big thing as well. You don't really want to be playing players that are just in really terrible form, because that impacts the team. It impacts the competition as well, really.
Yeah, agree. And maybe the Asian Tour is an option for that. They're probably not going to have as much conflict with Asian Tour events. So that may be one way of filling those extra one or two spots in the team rosters. As you point out, there's already players like Wade Ormsby, Ben Campbell, etc., that are at these LIV events as reserves. Sounds like a possible option.
Anything else from LIV before we move on to the PGA Tour?
Look, probably just a question mark around Singapore as a venue. It's a pretty tough spot to fill coming off the back of Adelaide and trying to keep the momentum from such an event that popped really well. So I think there was a noticeable difference in terms of the vibe between Adelaide and Singapore. And this is the great challenge, I think, for LIV, is to be able to recreate the Adelaide style event in more locations around the world. And if they're able to crack that nut, then I think they've got enormous potential and a huge future. So we know that they're stopping in Singapore because the tourism board in Singapore is tipping in a lot of money. There's plenty of critics of the actual course itself. I think it's a very tough test of their golf. And I think Brooks even said it's definitely championship golf that needs to be played, which is no surprise why he was the winner this week. But I do think there are question marks around Singapore as a venue. I love Singapore. It would just be great to see more pop coming out of that particular event, I think, and more probably from the crowd.
Yeah, I think, obviously the weekend or Sunday looked a little bit busier. Adelaide being the pinnacle, it's hard to replicate. I think it's going to be around the world. Maybe we'll see a little bit in Valderrama. And maybe even London or the UK may even have a bit of a crowd going on there. But yeah, I've been thinking about how they replicate Adelaide, really. I think it's probably a slow burn more than anything. If they continue to focus on worldwide venues and maybe not adding multiple venues in the same country, and make it more of like a LIV Adelaide, more of that sort of aspirational type event. So the must-attend event. So if you can sell out Adelaide and not add another event in Brisbane or something like that, just make Adelaide make everyone want to attend that event. Maybe you'll start to see the spillover, and you'll start to see others think, okay, maybe we need to attend Singapore. And then maybe that builds up slowly over time. And then you get that sort of Taylor Swift effect where everybody's looking to get a ticket, and each event become like must see or must attend.
Yeah, and I think you've seen that a bit in Formula One, where there were some stops on the Formula One circuit that were pretty ho-hum, and every city and every country is really lifting its game. And you've got some incredible Formula One events now right around the world, no matter what the city. Yeah, it's definitely the key challenge for LIV to solve. There's lots of untapped demand out there globally, and so I think it is around LIV selecting the right markets and really going hard. Like what you said, Spain is probably one where we do see it pop. I think New Zealand would be a fantastic location. They've got incredible golf courses. I think you'd find the fans and the crowds there would be very similar to Australian crowds. So it's interesting to see where they go next. Norman was obviously posting on social media that he was in Japan watching the final round of Singapore from, I think, Tokyo Airport or something like that. So he's obviously cooking up something in Asia further. So it'll be very interesting to see how it pans out.
Yep, absolutely. Let's jump across the PGA Tour. The CJ Cup, Byron Nelson held at TPC Craig Ranch, which looked a bit like a ranch. It wasn't in the best condition. That was won by Taylor Pendrith after Ben Kohles had a little yippy chip off on the 18th and essentially gave away his lead. I wouldn't call it a choke, but it did certainly look like it was a very yippy sort of chip. He went straight under that ball and ended up bogeying a hole that not many others did.
Yeah, in fact, he was the only one to bogey it on Sunday. A very tough way for you to lose an event going into the 18th with a one-shot lead. Lots of commentary on the course that I've heard in other podcasts and seen on social media, highly critical of Craig Ranch as a venue. I didn't see much of the golf, but what I did see of it, it looked pretty bland in terms of the course. The 18th hole's probably the best case in point. It just looked like an open field with not much doing at all. Tough scene for Ben Kohles, decelerated on that chip for his third, chunked it, gave himself an impossible stance for his fourth, and of course couldn't get up and down to save his par. So probably not the way Pendrith would have scripted his maiden victory on the PGA Tour, but you take the win no matter how you get it. And I think that probably all but secures him a spot in the international
President's Cup.
President's Cup, if he wasn't already written in. That's right. On to Canada with hopefully some form for the internationals for Pendrith.
Yep, absolutely. It's interesting, these events, that the fields are not incredible, really, are they? It's almost like a Korn Ferry to a plus sort of field level. I feel like the PGA Tour needs to further separate and differentiate between their signature events and their standard events, because it really is two separate tours really at the moment.
Andy Johnson on Shotgun Start was just incredulous that this field has the same branding as a field that we're going to see at Quail Hollow the coming week for the Wells Fargo. And I guess there's a bit of merit in that take. Should there be an A grade and a B grade style event, then I guess you start to blur the lines between the Korn Ferry Tour and the PGA Tour. It's just a very difficult nut to crack for the PGA Tour, how they get this right, how they get the best players playing against each other more regularly. Obviously, the signature events are the best attempt they've made so far. But probably what it's doing is drawing a sharper contrast between the weeks that we've just seen and the one that we're going to see in the coming weeks. So I'm not sure what the overall answer is, but I don't think it was coincidental that the Korn Ferry Tour Player of the Year last year almost won this week.
That's interesting because he hasn't been in great form. I looked at his form. So I called out Ben Kohles and compared him to Taylor Gooch in terms of US Open exemption category. So Ben Kohles obviously was the Korn Ferry Tour money leader or the points leader last year. So he gets an invite to the US Open. And I thought that call was going to backfire on me when he nearly won this particular event. But outside of this event, he hasn't been in great form on the PGA Tour. So it's come from a little bit from nowhere, which I don't know whether that highlights the field strength or just the fact that he's played well this particular week. But one thing I'd love to see is maybe a little bit more sort of fluidity in the movement between the Korn Ferry Tour and this rung of the PGA Tour. Maybe if you can have all the points, the two tours have their point system intertwined so that the best players on the Korn Ferry Tour get access to the PGA Tour and we see the better players float between the two and all attempting to get up into that signature series.
Yeah, and I think that's how it would work in an ideal sense. The challenge is that we've got things like sponsors exemptions and money list career exemptions, etc., that get in the way. And so actually solving for that becomes really difficult. So there's lots of criticism about LIV that its relegation is not fair income. It's not real. And I do think LIV's got plenty of work to do in and around the relegation side of things. I think expanding the numbers of promotions and relegations would be a good thing. I also think one of the scourges that LIV has is the captains not being able to be relegated. They need to do something with that, because teams like the Majestics, where you've got 3 playing captains, therefore 3 of them are exempt from relegation, just doesn't make sense at all. But the PGA Tour, equally at that bottom end there, hasn't really got it right in terms of the up and downs moving between KFT and the PGA Tour, and giving an opportunity to young emerging talent at the expense of some of the older mainstays on the tour.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the highlight, or that's most recently highlighted, is probably Zalatoris when he was stuck down on the Korn Ferry tour through COVID for that extra year, essentially, which was, it was clear that he was one of the best golfers in the world at the time. But yeah, he just couldn't move up just because of the rules. And it's a big and convoluted sort of system, isn't it, the PGA Tour, as we're finding out more and more as we get into this war between the tours.
That's right. And then just in terms of field strength and whatnot, surprising to see Spieth miss the cut. More surprising to me that he couldn't make the cut given the quality or lack thereof in this particular field. Does raise some questions around whether we'll ever see the Spieth of old again. I'd love to see it, but it's just been missing for such a long time now. You wonder whether we're going to see it again.
Yeah, we really haven't seen it since 2018. Really, is it?
That's right.
Yes, it's something. He's probably one of my favorite golfers, just because of how animated he is on the golf course, how talented he actually was in his recoveries, and he was never out of a hole. But he's far from that right now.
Agree. And like such an exciting player when he's at his peak. So I think all golf fans are rooting for Jordan to get back to his best.
Yep, absolutely. So we had a few Aussies in the field as well. Minwoo and Adam Scott, they finished 24th and 30th. Ads was down at 41st. Harrison Endicott, who has not really had a lot of opportunity this year, who was finished in 52nd, and Jay Day in 59th. So they all made the cut. I think of the Aussies in the field, they're all able to make the cut, but not really impacting the scoreboard like you'd like to see them.
No, nothing much doing with the Aussie boys this week. I think Minwoo flirted with getting inside the top 10. He might have even got equal T10 at one stage, but never really was able to push. So hopefully they can equip themselves well at Quail Hollow this coming week, and then also into the PGA the following week.
Now, looking at some of the other news, probably overnight there was announced that Taylor Gooch and David Puig both got invitations for the PGA Championship. Thoughts on that?
You could have knocked me off my chair when I opened up X this morning and saw that Taylor Gooch had been given an exemption or a special invite to the PGA Championship. Lots of back and forth on social media, particularly following Tiger's exemption to Pinehurst, the US Open later in the year, about whether Taylor Gooch was deserving as well. I think you're comparing apples with oranges there. Tiger will get exemptions wherever he wants them, and arguably that is right, given his record and status in the game. Gooch is nowhere near that, so I don't think comparing the two is a sensible comparison. But I am glad to see the PGA sort of maybe take a little bit of the higher road here, give Puig and Gooch the special invite, similar to what the Masters did with Neiman, because I think all of us as golf fans want to see the majors above the fray, above the politics, and just really focused on getting the best players together in those 4 occasions each year. That's what the fans want. That's what sponsors will want. That's what broadcasters will want. And so digging your head in the sand and not dealing with the LIV issue, for me, I don't think that's the right approach. LIV doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, despite what many have told me on social media. But I think creating some sort of alternate path to qualification outside of OWGR points is a sensible way for the majors to go.
Yeah, I think Puig has done incredibly well to get to the position in even the OWGR that he has, because he's essentially played Asian Tour events and he's just about cracked the top 100, which is incredible given he's not even playing a full schedule on the Asian Tour. And extrapolating onto that, he hasn't performed probably up to his potential on LIV itself. He's had a few reasonably high finishes, but he certainly hasn't, to me, achieved that same level that he has on the Asian Tour that he has on LIV. And yeah, so when you're comparing a Puig invitation or even a Neiman invitation to Taylor Gooch, who's won 3 times, it makes sense that he gets an exemption. Very surprising to see it actually happen, because there isn't much of a case. He hasn't really played any other tour at all in the last couple of years. So the invitation is either off his 2022 PGA Tour form or it's off his LIV form, which hopefully will open the floodgates potentially.
Yeah, I think it probably does put a bit more pressure on the US Open and the Open Championship to give some consideration to what they're doing around some of these LIV players that probably won't qualify through other means. So I think that's a good thing, and promoting or provoking the conversation so that we can land in a sensible spot on this is what I think golf fans want to see.
I could see it. Maybe what's potentially going to happen now is that maybe we do actually see LIV get some sort of inclusion in the OWGR. The fact that the majors hold positions on the OWGR board might be a way for them to not lose face, but get exemptions for all these players back into the major tours. Now that the PGA Championship has included one, I think you've got to start considering either being left behind by maintaining your existing stance or getting the players in your field. And if you don't want to do it through special exemptions, maybe we do actually see the OWGR essentially allow LIV players to get exemptions into the majors through their world rankings again. So it's going to be interesting over the next 12 months to see if anything changes there.
Yeah, I think the special exemptions is really just a Band-Aid fix. It's a short-term thing. There needs to be something more permanent put in place. It could, as you suggest, might be done through the OWGR, given the influence that these majors have on the governing board. Or there's just a separate qualification category. People have been suggesting the top 10 LIV players are given qualification, automatic qualification, if they're not already qualified through other means. So that's another way that it could be done as well.
In other news for the week, we saw the RNA saying that Greg Norman had not been sent or had not appeared on the ticket lists for attending the Open. Yeah, what did you? Any comments on that?
Look, I hope it's not true. It was a report out of the Telegraph, I think, over in the UK, reportedly from the director of comms. It would be a terrible thing or a terrible position for the RNA to do that to a 2-time Open champion and would just reinforce, I think, the perception that some of these major bodies might be engaging in politicking. Hopefully it's all just a storm in a teacup. If Greg wants to go, he goes. If he doesn't want to go, he doesn't go. But it'd be very petty, I think, if it was true.
Yeah, it's certainly, I guess, these sort of breadcrumbs indicate that things aren't going to change quickly. We seem to be in for the long haul in terms of this war. It seems like it's going to be death by 1,000 cuts. And of the organisations to actually accept LIV into the ecosystem, it looks like obviously the PGA Tour, but the Open, the RNA and Augusta seem to be the organisations that are going to fall last.
Yeah, the two most conservative of the bodies, you would say. And the wheels of change turn slowly, you can say.
Yes, they certainly do. They certainly do. Now, Lukey, I think we call that podcast there, our first episode. It's a little bit of a test run for us both. Yeah, so we're going to be aiming to get a podcast out each week, probably of a similar length. We'll throw in some segments and make changes on the fly as we get feedback from you, the listener. So we'd love to hear your feedback, whether it's on the socials or you can just visit our website, which is bttpod.com. Yeah, we'd love to get your feedback. This is obviously for us has been relatively nerve-wracking. Getting on screen and speaking publicly really is what it is for the first time is not easy to do. So yeah, it's good to get something out there though, I must say.
Agree totally. And to those that are listening, as Jake mentioned, we certainly welcome your feedback. We want to create an engaging forum and an engaging community for those that want to follow along and listen. We'd love to hear from you on how we can make this better going forward and what you'd like to hear from as we start to publish more of these episodes on the pod.
Brilliant. Thanks, Luke. Until next week, we'll speak to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jake.